Bill Gates meeting with China's Xi Jinping this morning, who called the Microsoft founder a friend. The Chinese president telling Gates China has always placed hopes in the American people and wants enduring friendship between the countries. No word on all the surveillance underway of America. This as Secretary of State Antony Blinken leaves for what's being called an ill-advised trip to China. Joining me right now is the Heritage Foundation National Security and Foreign Policy Vice President James Carafano. James, great to see you. Thanks very much for being here. You know, interesting to see Bill Gates meeting with Xi Jinping, calling him a friend. Xi calls Gates a friend. What do you make of these comments and the trip?
Sure. Well, okay, Bill Gates is a useful idiot. It's really deep insight, though, into how the Chinese are doing diplomacy. You know, since Trump and COVID, worldwide, there's been more skepticism about China's global role and their malicious activities. The Chinese response to that is super interesting to watch. It's a bit of a doppelganger. They jump back and forth between this wolf warrior diplomacy, those are those famous movies about them beating everybody up around the world, and being, oh, what, me, nice, friendly China? And so here they are welcoming Bill Gates, calling him a friend, even as many American companies in China are being increasingly pressured and victimized. And then on the other hand, they're being super tough with the administration and literally have the administration begging for a meeting with China. So this is what they do. They look and they say, where's the weakness? Where's the open spot? What can I do to push my agenda forward? But
well,
it's the same China.
Does Bill Gates not recognize the national security risks at hand here? I mean, the head of Xi Jinping in China has come out with all of these new laws. There's the PRC, counter-espionage law, the anti-monopoly law, the national intelligence law of the People's Republic of China, the PRC anti-foreign sanction law, the unreliable entities list law. I mean, all of these new laws that they dropped after marching through Hong Kong a couple of years ago enables the CCP to march into any American company, any foreign company in China and steal intellectual property and raid the place like they just did with Bain. Do American companies not recognize that?
So you're talking about Bill Gates, right? So here's a guy who starts a global health enterprise, which in some places does more harm than good, who embraces a climate change agenda, which is actually helping nobody, and who put his company in China, knowing all the problems that are there. He's been completely reckless and irresponsible because he lives in the little Bill Gates bubble where everything is fine. So asking him about being responsible about American interests, especially that, look, you have an American president. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but this administration was so desperate to get a meeting with the Chinese to prevent World War III that all the measures that are in Congress right now to get tough on China, the president's basically put a hold on all of those, so we can't meet the China challenge because Biden has to go plead with China not to be challenging. So,
well, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we heard all these stories that Biden was going to come out with limitations to buying stocks that are tied to Chinese military, and they were going to have, you know, sanctions as well as, you know, new regulations around trade. None of it is materializing at all. And then there's Iran. We broke the story on Sunday. Now the Wall Street Journal is reporting further that the Biden administration is quietly restarting diplomatic talks with Iran, wanting to free American prisoners and stop the country's growing nuclear program. I spoke with the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who broke this news on Sunday Morning Futures. Here's what he told me. Watch.
They want to send $17 billion to Iran, who, by the way, is Putin's #1 backer, sending Iranian one-way attack drones to be used against Ukrainians. So only the Biden administration could do something so colossally stupid as to be funding Ukraine to fight the Russians and then funding Iran to arm the Russians in the same conflict.
It's a similar stance. Now we're trying to beg Iran so that we could send $17 billion and, of course, unlock the $17 billion for Iran to buy more weapons for Russia. What is this?
So this gets to the really big problem, because this is exactly the same kind of feckless diplomacy that we saw in the Obama administration. You know, the reality is the party of isolationism and turning their back on the world is the Obama people. They've always just wanted to ignore their friends and just buy off their enemies. But here's the really, really big problem, is we saw that feckless diplomacy for 8 years, and then all our enemies in the world saw how that worked, And every single one of those officials, including the Biden, is back in the White House. So the day one when they showed up, all the bad people in the world say, we know how this game is played. And they've been playing these guys since day one.
Unbelievable. Meanwhile, NATO launching its largest ever Air Force drill, aiming to send a message to countries like Russia. James, you say a stronger NATO is important. Is it getting stronger?
It absolutely is. This gets really into the weeds, but there's something called regional security planning. And so what General Cavoli has done, the head military guy at NATO, is they've built regional defense plans for all of NATO. And why that's important is now every country can actually say, here's what my country is actually required to do to be part of NATO. So now they can go to their finance ministers and say, here's our realistic, what we really need. Forget about 2%. This is what we actually have to buy to meet our commitments for the defense of our country. So this really ought to help keep that momentum going. But then, again, here is another thing that's really important. There are things that are going good for America around the world. Stronger NATO, stronger allies in Europe, great progress with the U.S.-South Korean relation, U.S.-Japan. What do all those things have in common? Every place in the world where American foreign policy is working, it's because we have friends and allies that are pulling us forward to do the right thing. It's not because of this White House.
Yeah, Jonathan Fahey, jump in.
Yeah, James, what are your thoughts, or what are the odds that somebody in this administration, Blinken on his trip, asks the Chinese government or any of their Chinese counterparts about the origins of COVID? Is that just off the table at this point?
Yeah, it's a joke.
No, it is. Look, literally we had to beg the Chinese for the meeting, right? And the more aggressive the Chinese get, the more we have to beg. And then the Chinese put all these preconditions. Look at Blinken's track record. Every time he's met with the Chinese, he's gotten plastered. It's like taking your worst pitcher and sending him out in the World Series and expecting a different result. Even the administration has really lowballed expectations for this meeting. It is the most pathetic example of statecraft that we've seen in modern times.
Well, I mean, it's embarrassing. Look what the CCP has been able to do and get away with. They covered up COVID, obviously. They cornered the market for PPE. They sent a surveillance balloon into America to travel the country for a week and then send military secrets back in real time. They set up police stations in America so that they could have their own police force and surveil. They set up a spy center in Cuba, 100 miles away from Florida, so that they could further put surveillance in place for Americans. And what have we done in response to all of that?
Yeah, and yet the Chinese brand is down globally. People trust the Chinese less. They less want to do business with them. All their big signature marquee things, the Belt and Road Initiative, completely dead. 17+1 in Europe, dead. Trade investment treaty with Europe, dead. But the reason for that is not because of Joe Biden. It's because people see the Chinese for who they are.
Yeah, I would not be writing off the CCP so soon, though. I think they've got a plan in place. Yeah, James, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.